Hi everybody, welcome to the Designer Tips and Techniques virtual show. I'm Nancy Scott with Masterpiece Quilting, and we're going to wait a second or two to get the feed coming up. There we go. I can see myself. Yay! Again, I'm Nancy Scott with Masterpiece Quilting, and welcome on this beautiful Friday evening. I know it's the end of the work week. If we're working, I'm not sure what day it is. You know, we've just reached that stage of the year and the whatever's happening in our life. But hey, I want to share with you some of my favorite tips and techniques when it comes to working with panels. If you're like me, you love panels because you can create so many gorgeous quilts with them. Behind me, I've got a couple of panel quilts that I've made. They're so fast, they're so easy. We've got the big panel in the center and then just some piece borders. We've got, move the iron here a little bit for you. We've got this particular quilt where we've got this, these are scripture sayings in the center and then pieced around them to make a quilt. And then we've got another baby wall hanging up here where I've used sections of a panel and then pieced that together. So panels are one of my favorite things to work with. They are so versatile, so fun, so functional. But you know what? Many times when we buy a panel, they tend to be a little wonky where they're not perfectly square. And you're kind of like, okay, how do I work with this when it's kind of whopper jawed and it's not really square and you want it to be square? So today I want to share with you my 4 favorite tips on how to get a panel unwonky. I know that may not be a word, but it's going to be one for tonight. First one, and they're all P's, so they're going to be easy for you to remember. The first thing we're going to do is press it. Really thoroughly press it. And I've got a small section of a panel right here. And what I'm going to do is just warm it up with the iron. Just like us, when we're cold, lots of times just a warm iron will relax our muscles, make us feel really good. And so I'm just going to go over this with the iron to warm up the fibers in the fabric. And then what I can do is I can start stretching and I can start pulling and manipulating it just a little bit more and work it to where I want it to be as far as the shape that it needs to be. If I've got one corner that's a little bit stretched out, I can work the opposite directions to bring it back in. So that's my first step, is to give it a really thorough pressing. If you need to check, use your cutting grid while you're pressing, just to double check to make sure that everything is running nice and square. And I can already tell that I've got my bottom square, but my top isn't quite square. So while I'm ironing, let me flip it this way so you can see a little better. I'm actually going to work on tugging that center section up a little bit as I'm pressing it. I can tell it looks better already. Yeah, let me lift that up for you. So now we can see that it's lined up a little bit square. Use my cutting grid just to give me some straight lines. And once I get it exactly where I want it, or pretty close, that's when I tend to be a starch alternative person using the best press, but we can give it a good spritz. If you need a little more heavy duty, just go straight with a starch. And give it a good press. So that's the first one. If you got that wonky panel, first thing we're going to do is press it. Next one, another P, we're going to pull it. And this may be new for some of you. This is a panel, and I'm not even going to show you the whole thing, but you can already tell that it's pretty wonky. And it has more to do with, not that it was printed incorrectly, but just the way that the fabric was finished as it was going onto the bolt. It wanted to get a twist into it. So when we're pulling, what I'm going to do is line up the corners here using a safety pin, lining up this corner with this corner on the opposite sides of the panel. And if you hear kind of a thudding noise right now, we locked the pooch upstairs, and I don't think Miss Ruby's very happy about it right now because she's kind of banging on the door, wanting to come and be part of the Facebook Live tonight. Many of you are familiar with Ruby. She likes to be in a lot of my quilt pictures, helps out with a lot of the Facebook Lives that I do, things like that. And I don't think she's a real happy pooch right now. So if it sounds like somebody's getting thudded upstairs, if you hear a little thudding in the background, that's Ruby. Anyway, what I have done is folded this on the angle and got the bottom part pinned together. The majority of the time we think of bias as being not our friend because it wants to stretch and get things wonky and out of shape. But right now, bias is going to be our friend. And what we're going to do is gently start pulling this panel back into shape, back into square. So I'm going to work one side, and then I'm going to pin the other side, same way. Lining up corner to corner, and I'm using the printed corners as my guideline, not the cut corners. And I'm going to flip it to the opposite direction, and I'm just going to gently tug and pull on that bias, working up and down the panel because that bias is going to stretch. And this may take several times. Obviously, I'm keeping this really short and sweet tonight because it's a Friday night and it's starting to get a little bit late. And you guys have been watching tips and techniques for several days now and all day. But we're going to pull that and kind of keep unpinning, keep rechecking, keep pulling. But what you can see is the panel is already starting to straighten. So it's not quite so wonky on the printed edges. So that is the pulling technique for getting a panel to lay flat. Got two more techniques that I want to share with you. This is the one that I use most often. It's kind of a combination of the first one, pressing it and then pinning it. I will not deny that I can be an impatient person. I want things to happen and I want them to happen quickly. And so I want to grab a panel and I want to be able to sew. So I'm going to give this one a quick press just to warm it up a little bit. But you can see it's still a little wonky. Well, if I know what size I want this panel to be, I've got what this is. It's a small piece of my design wall. I use a styrofoam for my design wall. You can get it at any of your building construction supply places. Anyway, I want to say this is like a 3/4 inch thick styrofoam. So I am going to pin right here and start in my first corner and grab my cutting grid and use it to measure down. And we're going to go 4.5, let's see, 5.5 inches, and we're going to pin right there. Well, you can already see that we got some major sloping action happening here. So I'm going to use the cutting grid again. Oh, and I forgot to mention earlier, if you've got any questions or comments, go ahead and start typing them in. I'm talking fast and demonstrating this fast so that hopefully I can answer a few comments and questions real quick for you. So I'm going to line that up as best I can, coming across the top so that we're getting our top straight. You can already see that we got a big old wrinkle happening here, but that's okay. Don't worry about it. Then I'm going to measure down my 5.5 inches, and I'm actually going to bring this up just a little bit. There we go, to get it into place. And we're going to square up and make sure that our bottom measure right at 6 is aligned with our top. So this is what we have. The panel is now square, or squared up, I should say. 5.5 inches down, 6 inches across. We got all this puckery stuff here in the center. You can use water if you like. I normally go straight for the best press. And I am going to saturate this. Get it good and damp. And that's why I'm working on my design wall, because it's got a moisture resistant plastic covering over it. And just take my fingers and kind of start smoothing that flat. And I'm going to spritz it again. This upper little corner is not cooperating. There we go. And get that nice and flat. I'm just going to let this air dry. Do nothing with it, just let it air dry. This is a great thing to do, like, you know, when you know you're going to be leaving your studio for a few hours. Do this, let it dry overnight, and then be able to come back and work with it the next morning. It will dry flat. So, final option for you. After you've pressed it, after you've pulled it, after you've pinned it, I'll be honest with you, there are some times that you just cannot get these panels absolutely perfectly square. And what I like to do is then I am going to piece it into submission. I know that sounds weird, but that's what you have to do sometimes. I've got a second version of the wall hanging up there. That one's quilted, this one's not. Got one of the little panel sections here. By the time you add the extra piecing around it, it forces it to lay where it needs to. You may still have a little bit of fullness in there, but by the time you add the backing, you quilt it and you wash it the first time, that panel is going to be pieced into submission. So don't beat yourself up if you're close, but you're just not quite there. Go ahead and work with it. Go ahead and put it together. Let the piecing, in this case we had borders that we knew had to be an exact length. You may have to ease in a little bit of fullness, but by the time you get done, you are not going to recognize whether or not that fullness was added in. Real quick, I have got just about a minute because I know that I want to stay on time. Okay. Oops, there we go. Hi everybody, I'm just checking real quick. Hey Sherry, Monique, hey, great idea. Good to see you here. April also, hi April. One of the things that I want to share with you real quick, if you are into panels as much as I am and want to learn more, I do have a DVD out, Learn to Quilt with Panels, and it is available, and I'm going to go ahead and pop the link up right now so that you can purchase it in the comments. But in this, we go through 3 different projects working with panels. I'm going to be sharing more about lining up and working with wonky panels, cutting panels, doing all sorts of fun stuff with panels. And this is actually one of the projects that was in this DVD. So hey, thank you everybody for joining me this evening. Again, I'm Nancy Scott with Masterpiece Quilting, and thanks again for being a part of the Designers Tips and Tricks virtual show. Bye for now.